Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. We're starting our weekend day right with watches and everything is for sale. We're going with a relatively short run Patek Philippe Nautilus Chronograph as our lead off today. This is the 5980-1A, but this is the -014 model. Now the original featured a gradient blue dial. That came out in 2006. From 2010 to 2014, this gray gradient dial model was offered, and it was a low production run. It was a short production run. This is a very collectible variant of a watch that is scarce in steel. Now, it's only 12.5 millimeters thick, which is thinner than it looks in profile, so keep that in mind. 40.5 millimeters in diameter. I'm going to pop open the clasp right here and throw it on my wrist of 16 centimeters circumference. Comfortable watch, thinner than you expect, really very close to a Daytona. It doesn't look that way because it's fairly blocky and a Daytona has kind of a lithe grace to it, but this will easily fit underneath any kind of a cuff. And you can see down the barrel that the lugs are nowhere near the edge of my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. So this is nothing like the offshore to the Royal Oak. This isn't an offshore version of the 57 or 5811. It still wears pretty flat, flush, comfortable, 120 meters water resistant, and well loomed, all in steel. This is a real all-arounder, a watch anyone can appreciate and wear for almost any occasion. It's your dress watch, it's your sports watch, and of course, it is a chronograph. There's a mono counter at the base with the hours and the minutes coaxial, and it's a flyback, so you can reset and restart without first stopping. That's really handy if you're timing events that occur in rapid succession. Around back, the well-known Patek Philippe column wheel vertical clutch automatic chronograph caliber 28-520. It's got a 55-hour power reserve, a free-sprung Gyromax style balance, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring. It's a nice large movement that fills this case well, and it has a bit of a quirky date set. It uses a pusher because this movement was originally envisioned for the 5960 annual calendar, and that watch featured calendar indications, date, and month in that case, but here just the date, entirely adjusted by the pusher. Now, while the watch doesn't have hacking seconds, you'll notice it also doesn't have any kind of running seconds. So because of the vertical clutch in this watch, you can leave it running full time. So for people who like to have running seconds, just leave the chronograph running. There's no danger to the watch. And if you really want to synchronize to a reference time, use the flyback as a zero reset mechanism. And now you can synchronize to your reference time, and that is done. Now this is an expensive full bracelet watch in steel. Let's take a look at one that's a little bit more accessible, but also historically fascinating as a sort of emerging vintage piece. This is an H series, circa 660,000, Tudor Prince date chronograph. So this is a watch with a serial number of H660267, so right around 2001 or 2002 in terms of when this watch was made. And you can see it's like a budget Daytona from the Rolex sister brand. You've got a triblock crown, you've got a 40mm steel case, you've got a tachymeter bezel, you've got screw downs, you got a bracelet that is distinctively Tudor. This doesn't actually look like a Jubilee or an Oyster unless you want to think of it as sort of like a mutant fusion of the two together. I'd say on that basis, I can definitely recognize it. But the watch is very different from a Daytona. As you can see, it's got its own aesthetic with this lovely ruthenium-colored dial and a few accents of red. It's got applique indices, so it's got a nice upscale look to it. 7750 automatic movement, Valjoux 7750. So automatic winding, 42-hour power reserve, quick set date, hacking seconds, cam oscillating pinion chronograph, and all this is 100 meters water resistant, so you can absolutely take it swimming. It's got a decent amount of luminescence. You can see, although this watch is early 2000s, we are past the point of tritium on Tudor dials, so this is well loomed and you can read it in the dark even to this day. That said, if you want a chronograph that goes all out on lume, I've got just the thing for you. Let me know, do you recognize this watch just by its lume shot? Chances are you might. This is actually a 2023 launch, a very limited edition of 30 pieces in CVD blue grade 5 titanium from Rake and Revolution magazine founder Waco and Chronoswiss. We've got the Chronoswiss Opus blue titanium. Now it is the Chronoswiss Opus skeleton automatic chrono that first launched back in 1995 when Gerd Rudiger Lang was running the company, and it was then the first automatic skeleton chronograph you could buy anywhere at any price. So the fact that it was fairly priced was perhaps almost an undercard to the fact that it was the first of its kind anywhere. Now, you still have the same basic kind of skeletonization, mechanically applied but thoughtfully done, and very, very visually impressive. The original watch was smaller, though. This one's 41 millimeters, but in titanium it's very light. It's got traditional Chronoswiss elements like the Tasti Tondi style chronograph pusher's onion crown, the coined bezel and case back, and the pastille lugs with these screws and bars. It's a lightweight watch, being all titanium and sapphire. You can see it modifies the date of the underlying Valjoux 7750 movement to sit in the corner, and then let's just make sure we're not a date change danger zone here. But there is a quick set system for this little pointer style date. So you can see how that works. And it was necessary with this watch to re-engineer the date, because normally you'd have a big date disc covering most of the dial, and you've got to be able to see the mechanism underneath for this to make sense. The watch does have a 42-hour power reserve. You see that we've got that oscillating pinion lateral clutch I mentioned before on the Tudor, and the same kind of cam-based system. But although it is probably an electro-spark erosion skeletonized watch, elements like the reset hammer, the cam, the start-stop lever and its hammer, those have actually been quite nicely decorated, and even the start-stop lever has been punched out and evacuated, which is a very cool look. This is all CVD, so it's a gas-based color transfer, and it's able to create colors that are more vivid than a conventional line-of-sight PVD. It's a watch that's big, there's no doubt about that, but it's also super light, so don't worry too much. If your wrist can ship this, and even if you're borderline sized, it's so light and comfortable you don't have to worry. The watch is 100 meters water resistant, so it is in its way a sports watch. Automatic, titanium, swimmable, and really, really well loomed. And just a 30-piece edition. So back in 2020, Ulysse Nardin launched its Blast Tourbillon collection, and Ulysse Nardin, recently purchased back from its luxury group ownership by its management, is now owned and run by the same group of people, so it's independent again. And this kind of watch characterizes the modern era of UN going forward. The Blast Tourbillon white ceramics. The watch is big at 45 millimeters, but it's only 12.9 millimeters thick. It's made of sapphire, titanium, and white ceramic, so it's very, very light. We have this UN 172 movement. If you look carefully up at the top, you can see there's a micro rotor, and it actually has the latitude and longitude of Ulysse Nardin's factory in Le Loc, Switzerland. So we got micro rotor, there's a barrel under it, a drivetrain leading down to a flying tourbillon. It's a 1-minute tourbillon, and it uses Ulysse Nardin's in-house silicon technology. Yes, UN is probably the smallest company in Switzerland that can make silicon in-house, which is why we have a full silicon unlubricated anti-magnetic escapement and a thermally inert anti-magnetic silicon hairspring. It's free sprung for durability. All the adjustments are done using variable inertia screws in the rim of the balance, so fairly shock tolerant for a torb and also very precise to adjust. You can see all the sapphires here are clear because synthetic rubies, which are chemically the same material, albeit with a impurity that turns them red, the rubies would not look right here. This is a better look, and as a flying tourbillon, there's no upper bridge to block your view. On the reverse of the case, you could see that mainspring barrel under the winding system as well as the train. There's an X through the center, and everything is of a muted finish. A little note about UN, so you can see the first 3 numbers of UN reference 172 are also the caliber number, so just keep that in mind if you're ever wondering and you want to research movement and you have the reference. A big movement, it fills the case back, the mark of a true manufacturer, being able to make a movement to fit the case. And then something that UN tells me it's actually getting away from, but I think these are the coolest things in the world, the synchro clasp. So there are 2 articulated and offset chassis rails, and as you move like this, one side moves the other. So you don't actually have to touch that opposite side. It opens and closes in sync. And I think they're moving away from this because it's just a very expensive clasp. So I like the fact that some of these watches previously made are already out the door with them, because I think it's the coolest thing. The strap is a little bit of a surprise. You can see it's actually 2 materials. It's a gray rubber and then a gray calfskin. And though the watch is large, it's made of 3 materials that are really, really light. It's also fairly thin. So although it's about 54.5 millimeters lug to lug, I could wear this comfortably. You can see how flat it is. Titanium, sapphire, and ceramic are all really light materials. The watch does have some lume. I'm not going to call it great lume, but if I were to turn out my lights, you can see that this exceptionally dark blue grade of Superluminova, it's got a little bit of lume to it. It's got a long way to go before, you know, this. But that's all right. There's a time and a place for this kind of lume. This watch is really all about the movement. It does it well. Okay, so a cool piece and very light in the hand. That is from Ulysse Nardin. We have something else here from the good folks at Bremont, and this is one for the old guard. This is still made in the wing, designed and assembled in England. I know there's been some change there recently, but what we've got right here is the H1 Generation Fury. So this is a 40mm watch inspired by Dirty Dozen, circa World War II, 1940s field and aviation watches, and of course also the name Fury. You'll recognize that from the Hawker Sea Fury and the Hawker Fury aircraft, because Bremont traditionally has been an aviation-inspired company. See the old Bremont logo here, the propeller on dial as well as on the crown itself. It uses their older triptych case design with the mid case separated out from the lug profiles, and then a DLC coat to create a little tonal contrast and some scratch resistance. There's a granular dial base which is designed to give us that old school look. What appears at first glance like it might be small seconds is actually a power reserve indicator for this Bremont movement. Now we'll have some notes on that in a moment, but it is a Bremont movement and we'll talk about how they qualify that. So you've got actually center seconds, and this English made watch has all three hands luminescent, so you can see in the dark that it's running. It's 100 meters water resistant, and it does feature a screw down crown, so put it on a different strap than this factory calfskin, and you're going to find that it's a pretty versatile piece that you can wear just about anywhere. When I throw it on my wrist, it's a really good fit. My wrist 16 centimeters. I think you could probably wear this down to a wrist of 14, and it is fairly flat at about 13 millimeters, so no real issues with a cuff there. Aviator style strap, calfskin in black with a contrasting white stitch. Bremont straps are really, really soft. I don't know how they do this, but this is buttery leather. It strikes you as like the inside of a Bentley, a Jaguar, a Rolls Royce. It's that kind of quality. And on the reverse, we have a movement that is Bremont's movement. I call it Bremont's movement because they bought the basic architecture called K1 from a company called THE Plus in Switzerland. So it does have Swiss origins. Now they've made some changes to it. Specifically, you can see that the balance looks like a single-sided balance cock, but it is actually an irregularly shaped full balance bridge. That's a change they made there to make it a little bit more shock resistant. It's also free sprung for durability and precise setting. It goes through a ISO 3159 style test, and that is the basis for international chronometer tests. So it's going to match your Besançon, your COSC chronometry tests, and they boast that they run it with the winding system and the date attached, because apparently some companies will send bare movements to chronometer tests without the winding rotor or the date, and it's kind of like rating SAE gross and net horsepower. It's not the real horsepower unless the engine is being tested with a water pump, exhaust manifold, air filter, real-world spark advance, air conditioning compressor, power steering pump, and alternator. And again, you've got to test a movement as it's going to be worn with all the accessories attached. It has a hacking or stop seconds function. It also has a quick set date. And then the movement has a 65-hour power reserve automatically wound. You could see that it's about the size of a 289-282, so it's sort of a drop-in replacement for that. The movement made in England. And, you know, Bremont is going to pick its moments going forward concerning what actually gets made in England. But this watch was made at the Wing, a factory that was anticipated as the future of British watchmaking. And the intention when this was designed, and they tooled up for this, that this was going to be the vanguard of a new collection of truly British-made watches. So if you want the most British Bremont, this is a pretty good example of what that would look like. All right, and this is a pretty good example of a Jaeger-LeCoultre. Everyone loves the Master Ultra Thin Moonphase, and the black dial version, 39 millimeters in steel, actually came out at SIHH in 2015. And while this is very similar to that, there are some changes, and they're all good ones. The movement caliber 925 now has a 70-hour power reserve rather than the previous 38. So turning it back over, you can see that the case lines have not changed. It's still very graceful. 9.5 millimeters thick, about 45.5 lug to lug, and 39 in diameter. it does look quite thin because the case back is stepped in dramatically. When it's actually on your wrist, it looks a lot thinner than it is. It does look ultra thin. Easy to wear. This is a watch for a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. And other changes include the type of strap fitted. JLC now uses pull-tab spring bars to pop the strap off the case, but they also fit a clasp. This wasn't available in 2015 on the original version. You push that button and the clasp pops off the strap. That's really important because if you can pop your strap off the case but not the clasp off the strap, then you've only got half of a quick release and it's going to be hard to strap swap. The dial does include a coaxial date and a Moonphase. The dial is black and glossy, but if you get close, you can see it does have a pronounced metallic sunburst grain. We have applique faceted dart style indices. And then at center, we have Dauphine hands that are half satinated for better contrast against the dial base. A really, really cool watch, and one that is super easy to love. This is JLC at its absolute best, and of course, it still goes through the Master 1000 Hours control. Here we have a timepiece that originally debuted back in 2018. This is the second generation Bethune DB27 Titan Hawk, so it's the V2. 43 millimeters in diameter. It features the company's signature floating lugs, spring-loaded ergonomic variable geometry. The watch is a case that is engine-turned and engraved to create this micro-light texture, something that's repeated on the dial, and you can see the dial is broken into thirds. It also features the company's signature deltoid design, which is actually designed to evoke a leaf found by co-founder and watchmaking lead Denis Flageolet while he was hiking in the hills outside the manufacturer. Bethune makes its cases, movements, and its dials in-house, including hands. It also makes its own balance wheels and even shapes. Although it doesn't make the hairspring alloy, it shapes its own hairsprings. This is a very thin watch, only 10.7 millimeters thick, and with the variable geometry lugs, it wears really nicely. The strap in rubber, you can see no leather, super sweat resistant and perfectly suited for summer use and hot weather fun. Throw it on the wrist, and though a 43, it wears well on a smaller wrist like mine, and being so thin, it will slide underneath the cuff. A big difference, a visual and obvious one, between the first generation DB27 and this is that this has a center seconds hand, whereas the original 27 had a radial date indicator. The original also didn't have a display case back. This does. The movement's 30 millimeters in diameter, so it's nice and big and suited to the case. It's automatic winding with a 60-hour reserve. It's got the company's patented titanium and white gold balance wheel that reduces the effect of aerodynamic drag on timing, reduces the effect of temperature change on timing, and also maximizes the percentage of total mass that's in the rim. A full balance bridge that is anchored on both sides helps to brace against shock. That hairspring I mentioned, you can see it's not quite round. It's cut into two pieces. Both pieces are shaped by hand and then micro-clamped back together. You can just see the clamp. That ensures they breathe concentrically like an overcoil, but without the thickness and shock susceptibility of an overcoil. The rotor is titanium and tungsten, and then you can see that everything here that is blue is fired blue titanium, and the fire turns the titanium blue. But that same engraving you saw in the case, the microlight, and on the dial, has been used on all of these blued pieces. They're all engine turned. And then we have an incredible solarization across the winding bridge as well as on the tungsten mass. A really cool watch. It's got a pin buckle, it's a summer piece, it's easy to adjust, screw down crown, variable geometry lugs, and a very thin case that disappears on the wrist even as the colors make it difficult to miss. Okay, so we end with the big piece, and I always try to save the most impressive watch for the end of the show, but when I say big piece, I mean that figuratively in most instances. This is actually the big piece, by far the largest watch on the show today. Launched in 2009, this is the Breguet Marine Royale. 45 millimeters in diameter in white gold. It's about 56 millimeters lug to lug. This is a 300-meter dive watch. Has a super chunky 60-click bezel, and this little mechanism on the side is actually associated with the bezel detent. You can see it moving as I rotate the bezel. The watch has a lot of lume, and not just lume for the hands. You can see that the dial is well lumed, the bezel pearl is huge, and even the power reserve for the alarm is luminescent. So is the alarm setting indicator. And you better believe this is an alarm. It's based on Blancpain running gear, which means this alarm system in caliber 519, it actually can wind both the time-telling functions and the alarm power reserve automatically just from the motion of the wrist. Now you see it has hacking seconds and a quick set date. And then I've got a little crown down at the bottom. Both these crowns screw down, and I can set the alarm time. See, there's that little note up at 12 o'clock. I can set the alarm to be on or off, armed and disarmed. I've got a little power reserve indicator for the alarm. The dial in black is cut on a rose lathe to create these reductive guilloche patterns. This is a traditional craft art. The person who does this does only this. And the dial, though blackened, is actually a disc of solid gold. We'll flip it over, and you can see it does have a full clasp. And you can see the striker, which is beautifully finished. The decoration here, the beveling, the stripes, the snailing, the engine turning, which you could see on the white gold rotor, this is all first-class stuff. Deeply impressive and everything you would expect of a company with the reputation of Breguet. It also features a free-sprung balance for precision of adjustment. And remember, this is 300 meters water resistant. This is a real diver, no holds barred, with luxurious touches like strap minders made of white gold to match the case. We'll throw it on my wrist, and frankly, this is a little bit too big for me. I love the way it looks. I just don't necessarily think I can pull it off. So I'll let you be the judge of that. 16 centimeter circumference wrist, one of the coolest dive watches ever made, throwing shade on even the Royal Oak Offshore Diver and the RM28 from Richard Mille. This is about as good as it gets in the world of divers. Really, the only luxury dive watch that's a true equivalent in terms of features, finish, and overall refinement would be something from the Blancpain 50 Fathoms collection. This watch is awesome. If you love this or any watch you saw today, reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for pricing.